There's a specific type of silence that makes people uncomfortable. Not the silence of a shy person struggling to speak, but the silence of someone who has absolutely nothing to prove. You've seen this man. He walks into rooms without announcing himself. He listens while others perform. He observes without judgment while the world around him screams for attention, validation, constant reassurance that they matter. And something about his presence disturbs everyone, not because he's threatening, because he's free. Free in a way that makes other people realize they're imprisoned. Carl Jung spent his entire career studying this phenomenon, this terrifying freedom that comes when a man finally stops owing explanations, approval, or allegiance to the world around him. And what Jung discovered will fundamentally change how you see every relationship, every obligation, every should that runs your life. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the freest men in the world are also the most misunderstood. Why society desperately needs you to stay dependent, approval-seeking, trapped in the machinery of other people's expectations. And why the moment you stop playing that game, everything shifts. Maybe you're the man everyone calls selfish because you finally chose yourself. Or maybe you're still trapped, still performing, still exhausted from caring what people think, and about to discover that the prison door was never actually locked. Let me describe a pattern Jung noticed everywhere he looked. Watch any group of men in conversation. Most of them are negotiating status, negotiating approval, carefully calibrating their words to avoid offense, to fit in, to be liked. They're performing a version of themselves designed for external consumption. Then there's one guy who just says what he thinks. Not aggressively, not trying to shock anyone, just honest. No filter between his truth and his mouth. No performance between his authentic self and the world. The room shifts when he speaks. Some people are drawn to it, that rare encounter with someone who isn't acting. Others are repelled, threatened by someone who won't play the game they're all trapped in. Jung called this integration. The process of becoming whole by refusing to split yourself into acceptable pieces. The man who achieves this stops caring if you like him, not because he's hostile, because your opinion is no longer the organizing principle of his existence. He doesn't owe you a performance, he doesn't owe you comfort, he doesn't owe you a version of himself that makes you feel safe. And that lack of debt, that absolute refusal to play the social game of constant accommodation, that's what makes him terrifying. Before you tell me this sounds lonely, before you insist that humans need connection, before you list all the ways we're social creatures requiring community, ask yourself one brutal question. How many of your relationships would survive if you stopped pretending? If you stopped performing the version of yourself that keeps the peace, meets expectations, avoids disappointing people who claim to love you? How many people would still be there when you showed them who you actually are? If that number makes you uncomfortable, Jung knew why. And what he understood about the shadow, about masks, about the exhausting performance of acceptable identity, will reveal why most people never experience real freedom. They're too busy maintaining the fiction that keeps everyone comfortable. The truly free man stopped maintaining that fiction, and everyone around him can feel it. Every man who achieves genuine freedom remembers the exact moment he stopped caring. It wasn't a decision exactly, more like a collapse. The collapse of the entire structure of should that governed his life. Should impress his parents, should meet society's expectations. Should be the good guy, the reliable one, the man everyone could count on to sacrifice himself for the collective good. That structure held for years, decades maybe, until one day it just didn't. Maybe it was betrayal, discovering that all his accommodation earned him nothing but exploitation. Maybe it was exhaustion, realizing he'd spent his entire life performing for an audience that would never be satisfied. Maybe it was clarity, the sudden recognition that he was going to die one day, and none of the people he was performing for would die with him. That moment when should lost its power, when the fear of disappointing others became less terrifying than disappointing himself. That's when freedom began. Jung wrote about the second half of life, that period when the external achievements no longer satisfy, when status becomes hollow, when you realize that everything you built to impress others means nothing if you're empty inside. The free man entered this territory and came out different. He stopped asking what others wanted from him and started asking what he wanted from himself. He stopped curating his life for external approval and started living according to internal truth. This shift is invisible to most people but unmistakable to those who've experienced it. He carries himself differently, not with arrogance, with certainty. The certainty of a man who knows himself completely, likes what he found, and doesn't need your validation of that discovery. He speaks differently too. No hedging, no softening, no carefully constructed phrases designed to avoid offense. Just direct communication of direct truth. This makes people nervous because most humans spend their entire lives in carefully managed dishonesty. They lie about what they want, what they feel, what they think, all to maintain the social fiction that everyone is fine. Everything is fine. We're all fine together in this collective pretense. The free man shattered that pretense in his own life, and his presence reminds others that they're still trapped in it. That's why he makes people uncomfortable. Not because he's wrong, because he's honest. And honesty is the most threatening thing you can bring to a world built on comfortable lies. Jung understood something most people never grasp. The loudest people in any room are usually the emptiest. They need constant external validation because they have no internal sense of worth. They perform endlessly because without the performance, there's nothing there. The quiet man, the one who doesn't need to convince you of anything, he's found something most people never find: himself. Complete, integrated, whole. He doesn't need to prove his worth because he knows his worth. He doesn't need your approval because he approves of himself. This self-approval isn't arrogance. It's the natural result of living according to his own values instead of inherited scripts. Jung called it individuation. The process of becoming who you actually are instead of who everyone told you to be. Most people never complete this process. They're too afraid. Afraid of judgment, afraid of rejection, afraid of discovering that if they stop being what others need them to be, they might end up alone. The free man faced this fear and walked through it. And on the other side, he found something unexpected. He didn't end up alone. He ended up surrounded by people who actually knew him, actual relationships instead of performances, real connection instead of social transaction. But it required losing everyone who only loved the mask. That purge, that willingness to lose people who never really knew you anyway. Most people can't do it. They'd rather keep the shallow connections than risk the depth that requires absolute honesty. Which city are you watching this from right now? Drop it in the comments because Jung believed that geography shapes consciousness, and I'm curious where this message is landing. The first thing the free man stops owing is explanation. Watch how most people move through the world, constantly explaining themselves, justifying their choices, defending their decisions to people who have no actual authority over their lives. Why'd you leave that job? Why aren't you married yet? Why don't you want kids? Why do you spend money on that? Why aren't you more ambitious, more social, more normal? The trapped man answers these questions. He feels obligated to make his life make sense to others, to justify his existence according to their values, their timeline, their definition of success. The free man doesn't answer. Not rudely, not aggressively, just doesn't. Because Jung taught him something crucial. You don't owe anyone access to your internal logic. Your reasons are yours. Your choices are yours. The moment you start explaining yourself to people who aren't actually invested in your well-being, you've given them power they didn't earn and don't deserve. This refusal to explain confuses people because we're trained from childhood to justify ourselves. Tell me why you did that. Explain your thinking, make me understand your choices. But here's what Jung knew. Most people asking for explanations aren't seeking understanding. They're seeking ammunition, data they can use to judge you, correct you, convince you that you're wrong. The free man recognizes this game and refuses to play. His life is not a thesis he needs to defend. His choices are not propositions requiring proof. He lives, he chooses, he moves forward, and your understanding is optional. This drives the imprisoned crazy, because they need everyone else to justify their choices so they feel less insane about the choices they made. If you can just do what you want without explaining it, their entire framework collapses. Second thing he stops owing is loyalty to systems that don't serve him. Family expectations, cultural traditions, social obligations, religious requirements, all the inherited structures that tell you how to live, who to be, what to value. The trapped man serves these systems his entire life, even when they drain him, even when they contradict what he actually wants, even when they make him miserable. He stays loyal because disloyalty feels like betrayal. The free man recognized something Jung spent decades trying to tell people. These systems are meant to serve you, not the other way around. When tradition makes you smaller, you change tradition. When family expectations crush your authentic self, you disappoint the family. When religion makes you hate yourself, you leave the religion. This isn't rebellion for its own sake. This is the fundamental assertion that your life belongs to you. The systems can adapt, or the systems can be abandoned, but they will not consume you. Jung watched people destroy themselves, trying to fit into structures that were never designed for their actual shape. He watched men betray everything authentic in themselves to maintain family harmony, to avoid disappointing parents who were already disappointed, to preserve traditions that preserved nothing but misery. The free man stopped sacrificing himself on that altar. He looked at every inherited obligation and asked the only question that matters. Does this serve my becoming, or does this prevent it? If it prevents it, it goes. Family members who demand he stay small, gone. Traditions that require self-betrayal, abandoned. Social expectations that kill his spirit, ignored. This makes him look selfish to people who've never questioned whether their entire lives are built on someone else's blueprint. But Jung knew it's not selfish to refuse to disappear. It's survival. The third thing he stops owing is emotional labor for people who drain him. The trapped man is everyone's therapist, mediator, support system, problem solver. He manages other people's emotions, fixes other people's crises, carries burdens that were never his to carry. He does this because he's been trained that good people help. Real men solve problems. If someone needs something, you provide it. The free man learned what Jung taught explicitly. You are not responsible for other people's emotional experiences. You did not cause their problems. You cannot fix their internal chaos. And your willingness to try just enables them to avoid doing the work themselves. This sounds harsh until you realize how many people in your life have turned you into their emotional crutch. The friend who only calls when they need something. The family member who creates drama and expects you to clean it up. The partner who refuses to work on themselves because you're always there to absorb their dysfunction. The free man stopped being available for this extraction. Not because he doesn't care, because he finally cared about himself enough to recognize that his energy is finite, his time is limited, and spending it managing other people's refusal to grow is a betrayal of his own potential. This makes him seem cold to people who are used to using him. But to people who actually value him, he finally seems present. Because he has energy now, energy he's not giving away to emotional vampires, energy he can invest in relationships that actually nourish him. The fourth thing he stops owing is participation in collective delusion. Every society has agreed upon fictions. Work hard and you'll succeed. Marriage is the path to happiness. Having children gives life meaning. More money solves problems. Status matters. What people think of you is important. The trapped man believes these fictions or pretends to, because questioning them means standing outside the herd, and standing outside the herd feels dangerous. The free man questioned everything. He looked at the promises society made and checked them against reality. And reality told a different story. Hard work often leads nowhere. Marriage traps as many people as it fulfills. Children complicate as much as they enrich. Money solves money problems and creates new ones. Status is empty. Other people's opinions are their problem, not yours. Jung encouraged this skepticism. He called it confronting the collective unconscious, the shared programming that runs everyone's lives without their awareness. The free man brought that programming into consciousness and rejected most of it. This makes him incomprehensible to people still running the program. They think he's lost, confused, making mistakes. But he's awake while they're sleepwalking. And you cannot explain waking life to someone who's dreaming. They have to wake up themselves, and most never will. The fifth debt he canceled is pretending to be less than he is. The trapped man makes himself smaller to avoid threatening others. He hides his intelligence around insecure people. He downplays his achievements to avoid triggering envy. He moderates his intensity so others feel comfortable. This diminishment is so automatic he doesn't even realize he's doing it. The free man stopped shrinking. Jung taught that your full authentic expression is your responsibility, not your power hidden to protect fragile egos, your power expressed completely regardless of who finds it threatening. This doesn't mean arrogance, it means presence. Full presence without apology. When he walks into rooms now, he takes up space. When he speaks with full voice. When he succeeds, he celebrates without guilt. People who need him small react badly. They call him arrogant, intense, too much. And he recognizes this as their problem, not his. Because he's not too much, they're too fragile. And he's done making himself less so they can feel more. The sixth obligation he destroyed is the need to be understood. The trapped man exhausts himself trying to make people get him. He explains, justifies, provides context, hoping that if he just communicates clearly enough, they'll finally understand why he is the way he is. The free man realized what Jung knew from decades of therapeutic work. Most people will never understand you, not because you're not clear, because they're not capable. They're trapped in their own limited perspective, their own narrow experience, their own unexamined assumptions, and no amount of explanation will bridge that gap. This realization is liberating. He stopped trying to make shallow people understand depth, stopped trying to make fearful people understand courage, stopped trying to make followers understand what leadership costs. He simply lived his truth and let the interpretation fall where it may. Some people got it, most didn't, and he was fine either way because his peace no longer depended on their comprehension. The seventh thing he stopped owing is consistency with his past self. The trapped man is imprisoned by who he used to be. He made decisions years ago and now feels obligated to honor them, even when they no longer serve him. He chose a career path, now he has to stay on it. He held certain beliefs, now he has to defend them. He presented himself a certain way. Now he has to maintain that image. Jung understood that growth requires death. The death of previous versions of yourself. The free man killed his previous selves without guilt. The person he was at 20 doesn't run his life at 40. The beliefs he held last year don't constrain him this year. He grows, evolves, transforms, and feels no obligation to the graveyard of who he used to be. This makes him look inconsistent to people who are still performing the same character they created decades ago. But he's not inconsistent, he's alive. And living things change, only dead things stay the same. The eighth and most fundamental debt he canceled is the obligation to live according to anyone's plan but his own. Parents had plans for him. Society had expectations. Partners had requirements. All these external scripts trying to write the story of his life. The trapped man is still trying to satisfy all these authors, still trying to be the character they imagined, still betraying himself to fulfill their narrative. The free man threw out every script but his own. Jung spent his career trying to get people to do this, to stop living borrowed lives, to stop following paths that were never theirs, to stop becoming versions of success that someone else defined. The free man finally did it. He looked at his life and asked the only question that generates authentic existence. What do I actually want? Not what should I want, not what would make others proud, not what looks impressive. What do I actually want? And then he built a life around that answer regardless of who approved. This is the freedom Jung was pointing toward. Not freedom from responsibility, freedom for authentic expression. Not freedom from others, freedom from their scripts. Not freedom from life, freedom into it. The man who achieves this becomes dangerous to every system of control because he cannot be leveraged. You can't manipulate someone who doesn't need your approval. You can't control someone who isn't afraid of your judgment. You can't enslave someone who knows himself completely and likes what he found. That's why society works so hard to prevent this freedom. That's why you're bombarded with messages that you need to fit in, play along, be reasonable, consider others, not rock the boat. Because men who owe nothing to anyone are ungovernable, and ungovernable men change the world. Drop this exact phrase in the comments right now. I owe nothing. 3 words that shift your entire psychology the moment you claim them publicly. Truth spoken becomes truth embodied, and your declaration creates your freedom. Subscribe this instant, because you just demonstrated you're ready for perspectives that most humans will reject their entire lives to stay comfortable. This channel speaks to the ungovernable, and you just proved you're one of us. Smash that like button because this message needs to reach every person suffocating under obligations they never agreed to. Every soul trading authentic life for approval from people who will never be satisfied. Your engagement sends this to someone who needs permission to choose themselves, and you just gave them that permission. The next video coming will dismantle another comfortable lie you've been living. Another philosophical truth so raw, it changes everyone who encounters it. Another idea that will either set you completely free or make you so uncomfortable, you'll have to look away. And you need to be here when it drops because missing it means staying trapped in the matrix of other people, his expectations. Stay free, stay dangerous, stay sovereign. Or keep performing for an audience that doesn't matter while your real life passes unlived. That choice has always been yours. Jung knew it, now you know it too.